All right, takes a second. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica McCoubry. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Today, we're going to be talking about the science of smell. So really specifically, what is olfaction? That's just another fancy word for smell, and the idea of how different animal groups smell and the different ways that they smell and the different odors that they smell. So we have a lot of things to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and share my screen with everybody. All right. All right, so welcome everyone. This is our science of smell. Here we go. So we're going to go ahead and talk, like I mentioned, a little bit about what smell is. I hope that all of you will ask questions. I do have the chat. You are welcome to ask questions, make comments. Please feel free to do so. If I can't answer your question, I will find someone that can, and I will get back to you. So just remember that when you're in the chat and you're asking questions and you're making comments, just make sure that we keep things on topic and that we are kind to everyone. Otherwise, we do have that right to remove you. I also want to point out that I am by no means a smell expert. I feel like I have a good sense of smell, but that does not mean that I know everything about smell. So I am an expert in science communication. So I take what other people do and I make it accessible for other people to understand and to myself. So, and I learn a lot as well. So we're going to be talking about smell today and what exactly that means. So all of us hopefully can smell. I know there for a while, COVID was kind of scary when it first came out, and all of us were losing our smell or smelling things that are really strong, making sure that we can still smell. And I know some people never got their sense of smell back, which is really devastating because you can't smell things like cookies or pizza or really good things. So that is unfortunate for a lot of those people. But why does that happen, and how important is a sense of smell for people and also for other animals? So we're going to talk about that today. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So what do we mean by smell? So why do animals have that ability to smell? So it isn't just for making you hungry when food is around. That's like a surefire way to get hungry, as you smell something really good. It's part of our survival. So when you smell a food, or an animal smells food, or even an object, you often use that information to tell what that thing is and sometimes what condition it's in. And I think that might be one of the reasons why we have a sense of smell. For instance, if meat smells spoiled, it has a very distinct smell, and not just for people, but for animals as well. They don't want to eat something that smells really bad. So you don't have to taste test it and have that unfortunate circumstance of getting sick, and you figure it out after you eat it. You can smell that it just doesn't smell correct or right, and that gives people an understanding for our survival. So it's helpful with food in people and in other animals as well. So when we talk about smell, the sciencey word for it is called olfaction. So sense of smell is known as olfaction. Basically, it's your nose's recognition of tiny particles in the air called odorants. So these odorants, they're particles, and they're related from their source, and there are many different reasons. So for instance, you can smell a pizza in the oven. So when the pizza is heated up in the oven, a lot of the molecules will gain that extra energy from that heat, and then allows them to kind of vaporize in the air, and then that is what you are smelling. However, you can't smell a chair. I mean, you can. If you go up to a chair and you smell it, it might have a distinct smell, but it's definitely not as strong as something like pizza in the oven. However, if you take your chair and you break it up and you burn it for firewood, you're going to smell that chemical mixing. So it really takes chemical mixing for those smells to occur. It just makes it a little bit stronger as well. All right, so smell basically involves around 400 unique receptors. So what are receptors? So each of them, there's hundreds of thousands of them, different types of scents, and we can detect that mixture based on the different odor molecules. So there's going to be cocktails of things that are basically together, and they get mixed together, and that creates that smell. Basically, the odorant receptors, they are localized by these olfactory sensory neurons, which basically have a very small part of our brain, and it's in the nasal epithelium. And then every olfactory sensor has one odor receptor. So it matches so that they can smell those specific odors. So basically, scientists have been studying smell for a very long time, and it's very primitive, but it's also very complex, which makes it incredibly hard to understand and to study. So basically, even in this digital life and this digital experience that we live in, our scientific understanding of how smell actually works is very, very, very behind things like hearing or vision. We understand those things pretty well. Smell is one of those that we still do not understand anything close to what we know about vision or hearing. So we know a lot, but that just kind of shows you how much we still have to learn. All right, so how did smell kind of come about? So olfactory receptor, it's the gene family, it's the largest in the mammalian genome. So basically mammals are the best smellers out there. It could be for a lot of reasons. Our brains are usually a little bit larger relative to body size, but what scientists have found is that it's the largest in the mammals. It compromises about 1% of all of our genes, which we have a lot of genes. 1% does not sound like a lot, so just kind of keep that in your mind. Beginning with genetic radiation in reptiles, about 200 million years ago, terrestrial vertebrates started detecting these millions of odors. So basically each species of animal, we're going to go through a lot of them today, has its own olfactory kind of repertoire. It's very unique to their genetic makeup, so of that species. So each type of animal has a specific way they smell, and it has a very, very unique like olfactory receptor. So we're going to talk about birds today, insects, mammals, fish, all those different things and how they actually smell. And it's very different in a lot of animals. All right, so our ancestors, long time ago, the most distantly related animals to us are these things called lancelets. They're kind of like a lamprey, they're kind of like an eel. They're just these very ancient looking things. Basically, they split off from our own ancestors about 700 million years ago. They have around 40 olfactory receptor genes, and they don't even have a nose. At the time, they did not have a nose. So they could kind of smell. And then as things kind of evolved and adapted over time, fish, they're a very primitive type of species. Basically, water just rushes in their nostrils and holes in their head, basically is what is their nose. And they can sample molecules in the water, and they have about 100 different olfactory receptors, give or take, within species. But then as we kind of moved forward, amphibians came, and they have a different way of smelling. They were able to be in water and on land, hence the name amphibian. It means two lives. They spend time in the water and they spend time on land. So they have two different types of molecules. They were able to smell molecules in the water and water-soluble molecules, and they're also able to capture those airborne molecules as well. So as time kind of progresses, they've gotten a little bit better over smells. And we'll talk about the mammals today and which animal has the best smeller or sniffer in the animal kingdom. But when we talk about smelling, it's definitely a process. So different types of animals have different types of noses. If you've ever looked at an animal, you can certainly tell the way that they smell. Looking at an animal like a possum, they have a very long, elongated snout or elongated mouth area. Animals like deer, horses. People, we have a little bit more of a smug face. We have a little pushed in face. So animals that have those just have different types and different shapes in their nostrils, which helps them smell different things. So when you smell something, basically you have all these exposed nerve endings that are inside your nostrils, and each of them have something called protein receptors, and they're all for these different types of olfactory senses. So each neuron is covered in a type of receptor. So the shape of it allows you to kind of grab on to those odors in the air. And some of them are stronger than others. So some of them we grab easier, some of them we're a little bit more weaker, but it also lets others drift by. So again, we don't have the best smellers in the world. I'm sure a lot of us, have dogs, and you're pretty sure your dogs have very good sense of smell. But basically snagging a molecule from the air, it causes the receptor to kind of move around around and squirm. So basically this kind of leads to like a domino effect. So there's a series of reactions that ends with the neuron firing to an electrical signal in your brain. So once you grab that molecule, it sends that electrical signal to your brain saying you're smelling pizza or you're smelling firewood, whatever you're smelling. And then the brain gets those signals from thousands of neurons that are in your nose, and it creates a very distinct signature for each kind of smell that we perceive. So it is a process all the way from grabbing it in the molecules in the air to the neurons in your nose and that electrical signal going up to your brain and your brain saying, okay, this is what you're smelling. So, and it has each of those individual signatures for each thing that we smell, which I think is really cool. So those types of odors that we smell, there are many different smells, and we know that. And scientists have kind of put them into categories. However, a lot of people do not agree with them. It was very hard to find the thing that everyone uses. So we have a lot of different categories depending on who you ask. And so I found basically 10 different ones that people are able to recognize. There's a lot of disagreement in this, if the categories are what they should be, but this is what we're going to go with today. So how do they find these 10 scents? So it turns out these neuroscientists, they used this 30-year-old database that contained 144 different types of odors. And all these odors were assessed by human subjects, so people, and they were given a list of 146 words, and they were asked to rate how well each word described the odor. And so researchers wanted to see if there would be patterns to those receptors and basically those responses and how they grouped them together. So if they kind of agreed, they would group it into one. If these words were very similar, they grouped it into another. So overall, they came up with 10 different categories and smells. So these are the 10 that we're going to go with today. We have things like fragrant, woody, sweet. The thing that most surprised me is popcorn is a smell. That is one of the categories, not a type of that category, but that is the category. So fragrant would be described as something like cologne, soap, lavender. It's very, very smelly, basically. The woody smell is like fresh cut grass or mushrooms. Minty, I'm sure you can kind of get that one. Sweet, it has a lot of different things. There's almond, chocolate, vanilla is another one. Chemical smell is like kerosene, ammonia. Popcorn is literally like molasses, butter, and fried chicken. These are the categories. So, and if you think about it, there are some, and I can't remember the name of the animal, but their urine smells like popcorn. So that would kind of fit into that as well. Lemon, it's all the citrusy kind of things. Fruity is going to be everything that's a non-citrus. Pungent is going to be like sour milk and garlic. And then decayed is rotten meat and manure. So they fit very different categories. It is possible for some odors to fall in multiple categories. I'm sure a lot of us would agree with that. And then the odors tested consisted of only one type of molecule. So in reality, most odors contain dozens of types of molecules. So that's kind of the reason why a lot of scientists don't agree with this, is because those odors contain dozens of molecules. It's not 1-to-1 ratio. But this is what we're going to go with today, those 10 smells that people are able to smell. All right, so we didn't come to talk about people today, but I gave you a little background on that. We're going to talk about different groups of animals. So let's go ahead and talk about our avian friends, or our birds, and how they smell. So most birds, they're primarily sight animals. So they use their ability to see more than their other types of senses. So they have really good eyesight. They have very colorful plumage, a lot of them do, and they use a lot of non-acoustic signals. So a lot of body language, a lot of coloring, we know that. And then most birds really have a little use for smell. There's a lot of birds that just don't need them, but there are some birds that smell. And then also their apparatus for detecting odors is all present in all birds. It's just how they use them. So some of them, especially things like rails, cranes, grebes, vultures, nightjars, they're the ones that really are able to smell. However, there are certain substances that people have found that things like sparrows, ducks, chickens, albatrosses, they are able to smell. So not every bird can smell every single thing. However, all birds have the ability to smell. They have those nasal passages, but a lot of animals don't use them. For instance, great horned owls, they eat skunks. I don't think they would eat skunks if they knew that they smell, but clearly they don't. All right, one that we might be familiar with, turkey vultures. These guys are very common birds, mostly in the United States. We see them quite frequently. I know in Nebraska, we have tons of them. I'm sure a lot of you have them as well, but they have an extremely large olfactory bulb. So when I say olfactory bulb, this is the area of the brain that's responsible for processing all those odors. So it's a certain part of our brain. So turkey vultures have a very large area of their brain. There was a study done in 2012. They wanted to test how great their sense of smell was. So these people, I think it was in Kentucky, they wanted to get a lot of brains and analyze the brains of these turkey vultures. The only thing is turkey vultures are technically protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They are a migratory bird, even though a lot of people see them as a nuisance species. They are protected. So you can't just go out and collect a bunch of turkey vultures. So they had to get a bunch of permits to do this study. So they finally got a bunch of brains of turkey vultures and they analyzed their olfactory bulb. And what they found is that their olfactory bulb, their part of their brain, is 4 times larger than that of the black vulture. So we don't have black vultures in Nebraska, but a lot of other states do. They're a little bit larger. Their brains are larger, but here, their part of the brain that smells is 4 times bigger than that of their black vulture cousin. It also, compared to 143 other species, the bulb of their olfactory system is larger than any of them compared to their brain size. So turkey vultures, basically in the end, turkey vultures have an amazing sense of smell. They have what are called mitral cells. So they have 2 times as many mitral cells as black vultures do, despite their brain being a 5th smaller than a black vulture. So mitral cells basically are found in all animals, and they help transmit information about smell to the brain. Basically, it's a proxy for sensitivity of the smell. So they are able to use those to transmit that information about what they're smelling. And this animal has more mitral cells than any other species ever measured. So that's pretty impressive. So they can smell very diluted plumes of gases in the air, hundreds of feet above the ground. So a lot of times when you see them circling around, they're trying to pinpoint that smell that they're smelling. So they've even kind of ID'd that really what they're looking for, scientists aren't really sure. Are they looking for a specific one smell, or is like a cocktail of odors? So we're not really sure. Are they smelling one specific thing, or are they looking for a combination of smells? And scientists have even used turkey vultures to smell and kind of pinpoint leaks in oil pipelines. So they send a very specific smell through it, and they have those animals pinpoint where that leak in the oil pipe is. So this could be very beneficial for a lot of things. So turkey vultures might be detecting pipeline leaks here in a few years. Who knows? All right, so there are some other birds, a lot of seabirds, things like storm petrels. They can recognize a certain odor. The food that they eat, which is krill, has a specific smell that they can find. And then if you've ever heard of the kiwi bird, it's a national bird of New Zealand. They have the 2nd largest olfactory bulb amongst birds relative to their brain size. So this is their very, very long snout and beak that you can see. They have nostrils at the tip of their nose, and basically they root around in the leaf litter, probing, looking for earthworms. A lot of times, though, they also use their sensory organ, their vibration. So they're picking up vibrations, but they are also using their ability to smell. And then a lot of birds sometimes use this for mating. So scent sometimes appears to play a role in mating for some species. However, one of those is the mallard duck. So they produce a certain type of chemical compound in their uropygial gland, and that's basically the source of where they use their oil for preening their feathers. So this is only during the mating season, and that basically this indicates that there is a role in attracting mates, or sometimes signaling that receptivity. Are they ready to mate or not, using smell, and it's only for those mallard ducks. If you've ever heard of an chocolate, which is a picture I have here. If you're not familiar with them, they're a seabird. They're kind of like a puffin in a little bit. They smell like tangerines. I've never smelled one, but people say that it's very strong and it's very distinct. So it smells like a tangerine. Again, they only do this during breeding season, and basically they believe that it helps with mating. So they will nuzzle each other in the necks where this gland that smells like tangerine produces, and that's where it's located. And basically the females will choose a male that smells the best. So if he smells like a very ripe tangerine, she is more likely to mate with him. If the male does not have a really strong tangerine smell, she might go find another male. So it's kind of an interesting thing. All right, so understanding that we have 45, 50 minutes, we're going to kind of move through this. So I know there's a lot of things that I might not cover. So I'm sorry, we can always do more research. But we're going to go ahead and move on to reptiles now. So reptiles and birds are very closely related. So we're going to go ahead and talk about them. All right, so a lot of people think snakes right away when we talk about smelling. Their tongue is something that a lot of people know. That's how they smell with. They kind of combine the sense of taste and smell together. But basically, if you've ever looked at a snake, their nasal organ. So they do have nostrils, and they also have something called the Jacobson's organ. So the two little nostrils that they have, when they stick out their tongue, their forked tongue, basically, it has a bunch of chemoreceptors, and they're classified by their location. So there's a secondary olfactory system, and they believe that it's especially sensitive to chemicals that are important in like social and reproductive behavior. So there are certain reptiles that use those pheromones to smell each other out. So the sense of smell, basically, that olfaction involves chemoreceptors, and those are usually located in those nasal passages. So I do have a video of a snake. I know we've all seen the video of a snake before, but I got to add one. So looking really closely at their mouth. So they open it just a little, that forked tongue comes out. That is them sensing. So they do have an okay sense of sight, but it's really them looking through their tongue or smelling, kind of tasting the air through their tongue. So every time they stick it out, it grabs molecules in the air, those scent molecules, and it brings it into these domed pits that are in their mouth, known as those Jacobson's organ. All right. There's no sound, just so that everybody knows you weren't missing anything. So they smell and taste at the same time. So when the snake flicks its tongue out, it's forked. It goes in and out of its mouth, and it samples that air. So basically, the tongue is going out into the very small hole. A snake doesn't even have to open its mouth. And what they will do is they grab little particles in the air, and then it brings it back into its mouth. So using those forked tongues, why is it forked instead of just one single piece of a tongue? They can grab scent molecules from both sides. So instead of surround sound, it's like surround smell. So they don't have the best eyesight. They rely more on that taste and smell. So when they're moving around in the grass or in the wild, they're looking for their food. And if that sense of smell is very strong on one side or the other, they know to hone in to find their prey. So they can collect those scent particles from the air or an object. So it does not have to be just the air. It could be a specific object as well. And so basically they have their tongue, they bring those scent particles in, they go to two little special areas because it's forked, little dome pits in the roof of their mouth, which have a very moist lining, and it's sensitive to those chemicals that they're picking up. So basically those olfactory particles, they're transferred to these pits, which are then supplied with a bunch of nerve endings, and those nerve endings are collectively known as the Jacobson's organ. So they send those electrical signals to the brain is saying, okay, there's a mouse, it's very strong to your right. And this happens, in matters of milliseconds. It's very quick. You see them sticking their tongue in and out all the time. That's how fast that information is going to their body. All right, garter snakes are ones that do this quite frequently. So garter snakes, when they mate, they do this once they come out of brumation or hibernation. That's what we call it for reptiles. So once they do this, the males usually come out first, and they wait for the females. So they will bask in the sun and kind of wait for the girls to come out. And basically they wake up in smaller numbers, and it's not as quickly as males. So smaller numbers of females will come out at a time, and it's usually later. So once the males get done basking, they start to smell the females. So females have a very specific chemical, a pheromone, that attracts those mates. So as soon as those mates, those males, are smelling them, they will come find the female. And so a lot of the times the ratio is very skewed. There's a lot of males to females, and they will form this mating ball. A lot of people call it a mating ball, which is what you see here. Sometimes hundreds of males are trying to vie for one female. It's kind of interesting that there are some what we call sneaker males. So they know that they're probably not the biggest, the strongest, the fastest. So they kind of hang out in the wings, and they make a very similar smell to a female. So snakes are not the smartest things in the world. So they smell that similar smell. They think, oh, a female's over here, I'm gonna go get her. And then last minute, that sneaker male will slither in and try and mate with that female once all those other bigger males are out of the way. So fish will do this too. Bluegills have the sneaker males. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But again, it's all devoted to those pheromones and those specific smells. All right, we're going quick. So we're up to fish now. So fish were kind of interesting to me, and we're going to talk about a specific example here in Nebraska that I did not know about. So I learned with you. So fish olfaction, we don't think of it as an important sense because they're underwater. Truth is, it is. It's used for many different functions, including finding their food source, predator avoidance, finding a home area or spawning ground. So all those salmon that we hear about that goes to their spawning grounds, they use a lot of olfaction, or those smells. They also help with each other. Recognition of kin. So understanding I'm related to you, or understanding that we're the same species. A lot of kids, when we do education programs, they ask, like, how do you know, if you're a bluegill, how do you know another one's a bluegill? So that smell is a huge component in that. And then usually hundreds of all these things are reproductive behaviors, and that's another huge thing that smell is used for. All right, so we think of sharks a lot. They have a very good sense of smell. So one of the things that a lot of fish will have is this thing called an olfactory rosette. So when you look at a fish, they don't have a nose like we do. They basically just have holes in their head. And those receptors are located kind of in the pits of their snout, just anterior to the eye. So both of them, what they will do is they bring in, the in current, the X current, those nares or the nostrils that you talk about, it directs that water flow over this folded area called the sensory epithelium, and it lines those pits. So instead of them having like nose hairs or things like we do, they have those pits. So the water comes in and out of those pits. And basically each sensory, the epithelial folds, or the folds of their skin, it has multiple of these things called lamellae on them. And that is how they use to smell. And a bunch of those lamellae, those are those olfactory rosettes. So inside those pits, the holes in their face, they have all these little folds of their skin, and they kind of form like a rose shape. And that is what kicks those molecules out of the water for them to smell. So basically water enters the nasal pits from the flow of the water, and any chemical stimulus then is carried, comes in contact with those rosettes, and then those electrical signals sent to the brain and tells the animal what they're smelling. So it's very similar when you break it down to the electrical signals in all those animals. It's just the process of them smelling. All right, so with fish, there's this huge range. So it just depends on the shape of the olfactory rosette. Like this walleye is going to be very, very different than a shark, or it's going to be very, very different than a bluegill. So it's just the shape of that rosette, and also the number of those lamellae that are present. Also, the more lamellae that fish have, the better sense of smell. So things like seahorses and pipefish, there's this group of fish called clingfish. They have no olfactory lamellae, so they don't smell. Salmons, minnows, pikes have fewer than 20, and then some species have up to 90. So there's a huge range of smelling ability in fish. There's also a huge olfactory ability between freshwater fish and marine fish. So it's going to be very different. All right, one of the fish I found, catfish. So these guys are sometimes called swimming tongues because they have a very wide range of sensory abilities, hearing, smelling, tasting, all of those different things. So they're sometimes called swimming tongues because they have about 250,000 taste buds. Even on the smallest little tiny catfish you see, they have a lot of taste buds. But no fish has more finely honed in sense of smell, touch, and hearing than a catfish. So they can smell compounds at 1 part to 10 billion parts of water. That's impressive. So basically water flows over the folds of those very, very highly sensitive tissues in the pits of those animals' face, and allows the fish to detect certain substances in the environment. So those number of folds are really related to the sharpness of smell. The more folds they have, the better sense of smell they're going to have. Channel catfish, which we have here in Nebraska, it's our state fish, they have about 140 folds. Rainbow trout only have 18, and largemouth bass only have 13. So that's 13 and 18 versus 140. So catfish have a very good sense of smell, taste, and even hearing too. All right, what about insects? So when we talk about insects, we don't see a nose. We don't necessarily see nostrils. Some moths, like I have in this picture here, they don't even have a mouth because they don't live long enough to be able to eat. They just reproduce and then they die. So it kind of is interesting, and another wide range of smelling for those animals is going to be in the insects as well. All right, so insect olfaction. When we talk about that, they don't have noses like mammals do, but it doesn't mean that they don't smell. So they are able to detect chemicals in the air using their antenna or sometimes other sensory organs, depending on what they have. It helps them find mates, locate food, avoid predators. Very, very similar to a lot of those other animals that we've seen so far. But basically what they will do is they will emit a certain pheromone in some species, and that kind of cues their direct behaviors. Also, thinking about animals like insects and plants are very closely related to each other. Sometimes plants have certain smells that direct insects on what to do. It kind of tells them where they are. It tells them how to find them, when they're blooming, all these different things. So basically, it helps them interact with each other. All right, so how do insects smell? So they have several types of these things called olfactory sensilla or sense organs, and that is how they collect these chemical signals. So most of them, they smell gathering organs are located on the antenna for most species, not all, but for most species. Some species have additional of these sensilla located kind of on their mouth parts, or sometimes some species even their genitalia. So it just is very, very rangeful. So these scent molecules arrive at their sensilla, let's say their antennas, almost said antlers, their antennas, and they enter through this pore in the insect's body. And then once those molecules enter the sensilla, the chemical energy of those pheromones, it has to be converted into electrical energy, which will travel through the insect's nervous system to kind of get it going, which is different. We haven't seen an electrical sense yet. So simply collecting the chemical cues is not enough to tell the insect what to do, but it takes some intervention of the nervous system. So basically what's happening is once these odor molecules enter the sensilla, the chemical energy of the pheromones has to be converted into electrical energy that then will transfer through those insects' nervous system. All right, so then what happens, these special cells within the structure of those antennae, they produce odor binding proteins. So these proteins capture the chemical molecules and then transport them to a certain area of the body. And then those odor molecules basically dissolve. And then within the lymph cavity of the sensilla, without the protection of these protein binders. So basically the proteins are binding together on this membrane, and it changes the polarity, and it triggers a nerve impulse that travels through the brain, through the nervous system, and then it tells the insect what to do. And remember, this is happening within milliseconds, even shorter time than milliseconds. One of the animals that does a really good job of this is silk moths. So when you see like a silk moth, this would be like a Cercopian moth or a Luna moth, or the Polyphemus moth, the really, really large fuzzy ones. You see their antennae are very fuzzy or very feathery. So in humans, males and females, we have pretty much the same sense of smell, although it has been noted that females have a slightly better sense of smell than males. However, in moths, they are on two totally different playing fields. So male moths are going to be different than females. And basically, the antenna of male moths, which is going to be their nose, basically, they're very highly specialized to detect female sex pheromones. This is how they find each other. Females cannot smell themselves at all. So they have special pheromones that one of them, it responds. So it lets them know I'm over here. And another one is telling them, oh, you're not the right species. So there's morphologically and functionally two different smelling olfactory groups. Which is kind of interesting for silk moths. And then another one a lot of people forget are ants. So they are huge in smell and olfaction. This is how they kind of perceive each other and find their food. They also use pheromones as chemical signals, and they're way more developed in ants than they are in a lot of other insect groups. This is how they communicate with each other. So ants have that perceived sense of smell. It helps them find a location that's suitable to mate. They help them find their food, find their nest. It assembles individuals to fight off nest predators. They use their sense of smell for many different things. What's kind of interesting is similar to other insects, ants perceive smells through their antenna, and people are pretty sure they can smell substances that we can smell as well. Have you ever, dropped something sugary outside and all of a sudden ants are there within, a couple minutes? We can smell it, they can smell it as well. So it's a very strong sensory organ for them, and they will use it for lots of different things. All right, now we're going to move on to mammals, which is a little bit longer just because it's a little bit more not as primitive as a lot of different kinds. So, all right, so the biggest thing that helps us with smelling is our big brains, basically, for most of us. But we do have a sense of smell. We have a very good sense of smell, but we're not the best as far as people. So when we talk about this, mammals, first of all, they're characteristically large brains, basically to have a better sense of smell. They needed a larger brain case to hold those olfactory portions of the brain. So the earliest mammals, they originated about 200 million years ago. And then basically what's happening is that not all mammals have an equally strong sense of smell. Most mammals have a large brain, but it's not equal. So things like dolphins and whales, they don't smell at all, but things like elephants and dogs have a very good sense of smell. Since those mammals, things like lemurs, they have a very strong sense of smell, but then you have things again like whales, they can't smell at all. All right, so the best smeller or sniffer in the animal kingdom is an elephant, which might surprise you, it might not surprise you. But the sense of smell in elephants is used to distinguish lots of things. They use it to communicate each other through age, health, reproductive status, family relationships between elephants. When we talk about elephants, it's elephants and then dogs are next. So African elephants have more than double the number of genes associated with olfactory reception compared to dogs. So with those genes, African elephants have 2,000. Dogs have about 811. So there's a huge difference there in the number of olfactory genes. So olfaction, we know, has to play a super big, important part of their life. It is the highest count of any species that's ever been tested to date. And with this, because humans are the way that we are, we use a lot of this to kind of help us and one of the things, and I can't remember the country that it was, but there were a lot of landmines, and elephants were able to sniff out these landmines. And so it is a beneficial relationship because people can go and take those landmines out, and then elephants are safe and people are safe. But elephants have such a strong ability, they can smell certain types of landmines underground. Very similar to how those turkey vultures are able to smell leaks in oil pipelines. We kind of I don't want to say exploit, but we use that, for our benefit and for also theirs as well. All right, so when we talk about dogs, bloodhounds are definitely the best sense of smell as far as the dog world goes. But olfaction in dogs is very important to gather information. It helps them get information about their environment, recognize individuals, making decisions. They learn from this as well. If you have a dog, I'm sure they're constantly smelling each other and other things. So compared to humans, it is 10,000 times to 100,000 times as acute. So that's a huge range. And then putting this in perspective, like what does the 10,000 to 100,000 mean? It means that let's say that you and I can see a third of a mile. A dog could see more than 3,000 miles away. So if we can see it 10,000%, they can see it 100,000%. So much snow that they have been dubbed Olympic sniffers. And if you were part of the Science of Canids one that we did last fall, like December or so, you probably remember this slide, but dogs can detect odors in parts per trillion. So humans, they may be able to detect like a teaspoon of sugar in your coffee. A dog could detect a teaspoon of sugar in 1 million gallons of water. That's 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So they're, again, that 10,000 ratio to 100,000 ratio. We have dogs that we know they sniff out marijuana. There was a dog that found a plastic container packed with 35 pounds of marijuana submerged in a gasoline tank. So it was through that gasoline, it could smell the marijuana through that. There are also some dogs that sniff out orca scat. So orcas being the ones that, live in the ocean, they're smelling this in the ocean. So there was a black lab, it was a stray dog. It was in Seattle and was on the streets, and it could detect floating orca scat from up to 1 mile away across the Puget Sound. So they were able to smell through the water, through all the other smells in that area. They could smell the floating orca scat. And then we've also probably heard that dogs and other types of animals have been known to sniff out melanoma or different types of cancers. Doctors sometimes there was one study I found that they had sniffed out and said, okay, you are cancer-free. This dog kept sniffing at this person. And they did another biopsy. They found a very small fraction of cells that they missed. So dogs, and this might, be really beneficial for us in the animal world or people world, helping us smell out those cancer-causing cells. So dogs have up to 300 million olfactory receptors in their nose. Humans have about 6 million. The area of a dog's brain devoted to strictly analyzing smell is 40 times larger than humans. And then when humans inhale, we smell and breathe through the same airways within our nose. When dogs inhale, there's a special fold of tissue just inside their nostrils that separates the two functions. So they can smell from one side and they can breathe through the other. So we do the same. Dogs do it in 2 separate areas. And then one path for respiration, and then there's one path for olfaction. All right, so another thing is if you ever have a dog and they constantly smell, they're like, the whole time. I can't do it, but they can do it for like 30 seconds and it's a very long time. We can't do that. So the human sense of smell is regulated to a very small section of our roof and our nasal cavity, and that's where the main airflow comes in. So the air we smell just goes in and then it goes out with the air that we breathe. In dogs, around 12% of the air that comes in goes to a special area of the nose that's strictly dedicated to that olfaction. The rest of the incoming air kind of sweeps past this little nook and it disappears down the pharynx to the lungs. So in here, the air filters through this like labyrinth of bony structures. And then basically it sifts through the chemical compounds in there. It recognizes the odor molecules by the shape, by the electrical signals, and then it sends that information to the brain. So humans in and out, dogs in goes separately to its different little areas, and it strictly is 12% of that air is strictly just to smell. All right, so also when they exhale, When we exhale through our nose, we put all the air that we breathe in and it comes out. When dogs exhale, the spent air through the slits in the side of their nose, it actually helps usher in new odors in the air. So it allows the dogs to sniff continuously. I think one time our chocolate lab just smelled for like 45 seconds. And I'm like, how do you do that? Aren't you out of breath? No, it's not. They're not out of breath. There was a study done in the University of Oslo in Norway, and a hunting dog holding its head up into the wind searched for this game species continuously for 40 seconds, and it spanned 30 respiratory cycles. So that's people going 30 times. The dog, smelled for 40 seconds straight and did 30 respiratory cycles. All right, mammals underwater. So there's a lot of different types of mammals that can smell. The ones that live underwater, they've adapted to doing other things, but they've lost certain other things. So when mammals adapted to living in water, their sense of smell usually degenerates. These are things like whales and dolphins. Many of them have completely lost their sense of smell. There's a very inconvenient link between the nose and the lungs, and being something that lives underwater, it's hard for them to do that. However, there has been one found, the star-nosed mole. It's a semi-aquatic mammal, so very similar to the moles that we have here. But if you ever Google one, their face looks like a star, and it has this cool mouthpiece on it. They can smell underwater. So basically someone was studying star-nosed moles, and they kept noticing that they were blowing bubbles out of their nostrils and then like sucking them right back in. And basically what they determined is that they were inhaling and exhaling bubbles very quickly, about 5 to 10 times per second. That's the same rate as a rodent sniffing that's very similar in size, like rats and mice. And so basically they figured out these bubbles have come in contact with an object, and then basically those odor molecules mixed with the air, and it's drawn into the nose when that bubble is inhaled. So we did find one mammal that can technically smell underwater. So they are semi-aquatic, and they're using those bubbles to grab those scents and then inhale them as well. All right, one last thing that you might be familiar with, if any of you have cats, like house cats at home, you may have noticed this weird, it looks like panting or looks like a grimace on their face. They hold their mouth open, and sometimes people get offended that they're like smelling people. It's not. It's a behavioral response called the flehmen response. So this is a response in a behavioral response to certain stimuli. It's usually an odor that allows the animal to better access the information carried through smell. So this is a voluntary response. So they're doing it on purpose. But basically an animal will hold their mouth open and kind of pull back their upper lip, very similar to this animal here. And it allows air to pass through this thing called the vomeronasal organ. And it's used to process hormones and pheromones that are secreted by other animals, usually of the same species. So it's a combination of smell and taste. Most animals that do this have a special opening in the roof of their mouth just behind their front teeth. That's why they move their upper lip so that that smell, that air can go into there, and that duct transfers them to the vomeronasal organ. So it's been recorded in things like house cats, also wild cats like lions and tigers, goats, sheep, and horses as well. Horses are very noticeable when they do it because they basically flop that upper lip back, but that is called the flehmen response. If you've ever noticed it or have never noticed it and you have a cat, house cats do it all the time. A lot of things can also set them off, even things like dirty laundry. If there's another cat in the house, like the urine of a cat, other animals in the house, they will flip that upper lip up and kind of smell and taste the air. All right, so that was like heavy stuff today, a lot of words, a lot of vocabulary that we talked about today, but there was a lot of cool information I hope you learned about today. So next week, we're already, excuse me, gonna be in February. So we're gonna switch it up. We're gonna talk about gar. So these are gonna be your fish, your short-nosed gar, your long-nosed gar. That's what we have here in Nebraska, but we're going to talk about gar overall as a species. So we're also going to, next 2 weeks from now, science of bighorn sheep. This will be strictly about their natural history, their adaptations. It won't be anything about like our lottery system or how to hunt them. It's going to be about their adaptations and the biology of them. And then we're going to finish out the series on the 15th talking about garter snakes. All right, if you liked this and you want more, we have a ton of videos, Science Up videos on our Nebraska Game and Parks Education YouTube site. If you are like me and I really wish you would do a Science of Blue jays, I have a Science of corvids that you can check out. If you like us and want to learn some information, we have a very active Facebook and Instagram social media sites. Go ahead and check those out, Nebraska Wildlife Education. And then we also have our Nebraska Wildlife Education website. We have free downloadable activities. We have PowerPoints that you can look at. We have education trunks that you can check out. Lots of fun things. All right, thanks everyone. We will see you next week. We're going to be talking about GAR. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and I'm going to check the chat to see if we have anything. All right, someone said a couple sites, whales lack the sense of smell. There's always an exception. I absolutely agree. 2011, researchers revealed that bowhead whales have the ability to smell. They believe that bowheads use their olfactory sense to sniff the air in search of krill. Thank you. In humans, smell is connected to memory. Is that similar in animals? Ooh, good question. I was gonna kind of go down that road, but I didn't really want to talk more about people than like natural resources and animals. I will look into that, Mary, and I will probably send a little blurb out in my evaluation and my email that I send everybody. So everyone that registers, if you are not familiar, you will get an email from me probably tomorrow with the link on YouTube, some resources, the links to join next week for the Science of GAR. So good question, Mary. I will look that up and send some more information next week, or when I send that email out, probably tomorrow. So all right. It was like heavy stuff today, but thanks for hanging in there with me. It's called the Science Of. We definitely get into the science of it. So thank you, everyone. I'll be sending you an email with some links and resources, and we will hopefully see all of you next week. So thank you very much. Have a good day.